All right, so let's start. The French constitutional monarchy. Why does it happen and how do we get there? First, we meet with the Estates General. You know that Louis XVI was forced into this meeting because France was bankrupt and the Assembly of Notables refused to approve any new taxes unless the Estates General was called. This was problematic because the Third Estate, as you know from class, refused to work with anybody unless they were allowed to sit with members of the First and Second Estate rather than sit separately, and also because they wanted a sort of a vote by representation. They did not think it was fair that the Third Estate, the 99%, received only one vote, whereas the First and Second Estate each got their own vote as well. They wanted vote by population. There was a lot of protesting, a lot of chaos. Eventually, some of the lower clergy members from the First Estate joined into these protests. These were their complaints. The First Estate, the lower clergy, the less affluent clergy, petitioned against church hierarchy. Okay, there were problems within the church as well as in society. The Second Estate, some of the poorer nobles wanted some systematic change. Okay, so I guess what that means is they're on a fixed income. They wanted, since I don't have a year to teach the class, I'm sorry, let's just leave it at the fact that the Second Estate shared some complaints with the Third Estate. The Third Estate, by and large, was demanding a constitutional monarchy, just like their neighbors to the north in England and also in the Dutch Republic to some extent. They wanted regular meetings of the Estates General. They wanted personal freedoms guaranteed by law, which is, of course, liberalism. And they wanted relaxed taxation of the middle class and the poor. So they wanted tax equality. Because you can imagine the king did not want to agree to these complaints from the Third Estate, the Third Estate marched out and declared themselves a national assembly. This began on June 17th. They were actually locked out of the Estates General meeting, so they went into the nearest tennis court and swore a tennis court oath, which is where they swore not to leave until they had established a constitution. This is a painting by Jacques-Louis David of the tennis court oath. You can see there's somebody in the middle. I think it's supposed to be Abbe Sayes, and sorry about my pronunciation. And there they are swearing an oath to the Constitution, or at least to create a constitution. This is a copy of the tennis court oath. You'll probably see this again. So take a good look at this. The National Assembly, considering that it has been summoned to establish the Constitution of the Kingdom, to effect the regeneration of the public order, and to maintain the true principles of monarchy, that nothing can prevent it from continuing its deliberations in whatever place it may be forced to establish itself, of course by the military, and finally that whatsoever its members are assembled, there is the National Assembly. Later on, the peasants got involved. While all of this is going on, there was famine, people were hungry, and there were rumors that the king had this huge armory in the Bastille, which was like this medieval fortress where actually 4 prisoners were being kept. There were rumors that there were other prisoners there, but in reality there were only 4. So Louis XVI got rid of his sort of like middle-of-the-road finance minister. Peasants were afraid of taxation and further starvation. So the peasants now revolted with their pitchforks and all kinds of really gross tools that they used to kill people, and they marched to the Bastille. At first, they were held back by the National Guard, but not the National Guard, I'm sorry, but by the King's Guard, and eventually they took the prison. It was a very bloody sort of event. The governor of the prison was hacked to death, and they stuck his head on a pike and marched it through Paris. I think there's some symbolism they're going for there, you can imagine. So in any case, the outcome of this is the king was forced to recall his moderate finance minister, and he actually lost control of Paris after July 14th, which is known in France today still as French Independence Day or Bastille Day. Here are some paintings of Bastille Day. This is the Bastille. You can see it's pretty hardcore to take this gigantic fortress. This is a very symbolic victory for the people. Again, these are the peasants, okay, who do this. Here's this, you can see women actually play a very central role here in the French Revolution. Okay, sorry, some quick editing. Okay, so the Great Fear. Now, the nobles are terrified of the countryside peasants. Okay, they burned their debts. They took the pieces of paper that said they owed money and they burned them in public, and then they took this momentum from storming the Bastille and they seized lands and forests. so that they could actually like hunt and continue to provide food for their families. Certain nobles, such as the Duke of, I'm not going to try and pronounce the name, urged to tax equality and the elimination of feudal dues, but by and large, most of the nobles were just terrified of the peasants. They were peaceful for now that they got their new land. For now. For now. For now. Finally, on August 27th, the tennis court oath people, the National Assembly, the bourgeoisie, remember, they declared the rights of man and citizen in their Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen. This is like comparable to the Declaration of Independence. This guaranteed equality before the law, it guaranteed representative government, and individual freedom. So this is a constitutional monarchy based on the ideas of classical liberalism. All right, men are born free and equal in rights to liberty, property, security, and resistance to oppression. Think of that liberty, property, and security, and which philosophy does that remind you of? And then think about it as an expression of the general will, hint, hint. All citizens have the right to concur personally or through their representatives in its formation. So think about which philosophy that reminds you of. Okay, now just about 2 months later, there was a women's march through Paris. 7,000 women are still starving and desperate to feed their families, so they march from Paris to Versailles demanding bread from the king and queen. They actually invade the palace, they kill some of the king and queen's personal bodyguards, and they called for the baker, which was another way of calling for the king. Okay, so this did not go well for the king and queen. They were forced then to live in Paris. The women literally with their pitchforks there marched them back to Paris, and they sort of live under house arrest for a while. Okay, so here's a quick summary of what we call the bourgeoisie phase. It's called the bourgeoisie phase because the people who start all of this at the Estates General, forming their own national assembly, were the upper middle class, also known as the bourgeoisie. These were not peasants, these were unhappy members of the upper middle class, still members of the Third Estate. So you can see that this sort of continuation here. Okay, so I'll leave that up for just a moment. Okay, the results of this is that the king still remained the head of state. However, it's now a constitutional monarchy, meaning the lawmaking power goes to the National Assembly. All of a sudden, women get rights like to divorce, if they can inherit property and receive child support, but we still can't vote or hold office, but that's okay. They consolidated all these different provinces to just 83 equally sized departments to simplify everything. It's more reasonable, to do things that way. They began to introduce the metric system, more evidence of reason. They adopted a new flag, the tricolor, the blue, white, and red flag you see in the background of this presentation. They accepted a laissez-faire approach to government, which means free hand, which is referring, of course, to Adam Smith's free hand, the invisible hand of supply and demand. The government should not be involved in limiting trade or setting price. It granted religious freedom to Jews and Huguenots. It nationalized church property because, of course, Enlightenment thinkers would not support honoring the church or their stake to property. And it established a national church and forced clergy to swear an oath to the state. Okay, this is later on going to be a big problem for the peasants because the peasants are going to still be very religious, whereas the middle class is more influenced by Enlightenment ideals that reject traditional religious views. Okay, I'm going to pause here, and that takes us from 1789 to 1791, the bourgeoisie phase of the revolution.